Hey guys, one of the most popular questions I get about sourcing products is whether to choose a particular niche to sell in or just have a store that sells a broad range of products in the overall kind of general niche. And I'll give you an example of niche and broad right now. For niche, you could say that you only sell fishing gear, which is a very specific niche, right? Only people that like fishing gear would go to your website or would benefit from your website. A broad store would be someone that sells all types of sporting goods. So fishing, camping, hiking, baseball, basketball, bicycling, beachwear, things like that. So that's just a very brief example. And choosing a niche or broad is probably one of the first decisions you have to make when it comes to sourcing products. Before you dive into actually looking at products, you may want to ask yourself this particular question. And I want to go over some of the differences between niche and broad right now, things that you should really consider about both. The first thing is about branding. A niche store is always going to be easier to brand because that store is solely focused on one particular niche. For example, if I sold fishing gear, then it's pretty easy to brand that store, right? Every picture I put on that website is going to be about fishing. People that come to that store are probably going to be fishermen, and they're going to really like that store, and they're going to resonate with that store. In a broad store that sells all types of sporting goods, then you may get customers that like fishing, you may get customers that like camping or hiking or playing basketball or bicycling, and they may come to the store and get kind of overwhelmed by all the products there. They may see a lot of products they don't really care for because they may be coming there to find fishing gear, but they're going to find camping gear. So branding is a little bit more difficult. So on your website, you're going to have pictures of all sorts of different things, and it's not going to be very focused because you're selling so many types of things. So the niche probably wins in that case. Niche also has higher customer loyalty, right? If I'm a die-hard fisherman and I found a fishing online store that I really like, I may always come back to buy everything I need as far as gear or bait or hooks or fishing rods. I might come to that same store and buy it because I'm loyal to that store. A broad store, you may come to that store and you find something good here and there, but there's so many things on that store that almost distracts you from your loyalty to that store. You almost feel overwhelmed when you go to that store. Say I'm a fisherman and I go to a sporting goods store, I may see all sorts of things in there. And it's not organized in a fashion that's catered to the fisherman. So you may not feel, I may not feel as loyal to that sporting goods store as I would if I went to a niche fishing store. So niche wins in that aspect. Retargeting. When I say the word retargeting, I'm talking about Facebook ads. So I think I mentioned this earlier, but you can set up your Facebook ads to retarget people that, I'm sorry about that my alarm went off, but you can set up your Facebook ads to retarget people that come to your store. So if you had a niche store on fishing gear, everyone that came there most likely are going to be people that like fishing, right? So if you retarget them with an ad to buy, your best fishing rod, they may be entertained by that advertisement. However, if you were a fisherman and went to a broad store that sold all sorts of types of sporting goods, then that's your retargeting ad may be trying to sell camping gear, but that ad is served to a fisherman. In which case that fisherman would not really care for that ad because they're not campers, they're fishers. So your retargeting may be more difficult. You may be retargeting people with Facebook ads that they may not resonate with. So it's a little bit more difficult. So you're going to have to run a lot of different Facebook ads for a broad store. Whereas if you had a niche store, you can keep retargeting that same niche, which is a pretty big deal. So the niche wins in that aspect. Niche is also less upfront work than a broad store. So far the trend has been that niche is pretty good, and overall I would probably agree. So less upfront work. What do I mean by that? If you're in a niche, and this is not a blanket statement, this may not always be true, but overall in general, when you have a niche store, it is relatively easier and faster to set up that store than setting up a broad store. For example, if you had I'm going to keep using the same example here, but if you had a fisherman's store, then you could add in fishing rods, fishing bait, and all the other requirements for fishing But if you had a broad sporting goods store, you would have to add all of the requirements for fishing just in your fishing section, but then you would have to add all of the products required for camping, all the products required for bicycling, all the products required for, basketball or baseball, and that's going to take you a lot of time. So less upfront work for the niche store, more upfront work for the broad store. Niche store is also less maintenance. When you set up your store, you'll soon realize that you're always editing your store, right? Adding new products, removing old products, changing pictures, changing how it looks, changing your sales funnel. And it seems to me that generally maintenance on a store is a little bit easier with a niche store than a broad store. I'll give you a very good example here. If you're drop shipping from AliExpress and you have a niche store that has 100 products, occasionally some of those products are going to disappear from AliExpress, meaning that auction on AliExpress, it's not really an auction, but say a fishing rod that you're drop shipping from AliExpress disappears on AliExpress. Well, when that happens, you have to remove that product from your store as well. So with 100 products, maybe that happens 3 or 4 times a month. If you have a broad store that has fishing gear, camping gear, basketball gear, baseball gear, and you have 1,000 products, the frequency at which a product is removed on AliExpress and therefore removed on your Shopify store is still the same frequency, so about 3 to 4 out of 100. But if you have 1,000 products, then now you're having about 30 to 40 products removed every month, as opposed to 3 and 4, which is what you would be removed in the niche store. So if you're having 30 to 40 products removed from your store automatically every month, then those are 30 to 40 products you have to replace with a different product, and that takes a good amount of time. So maintenance is easier on the niche store than a broad store. Smaller niche have a smaller target population. This is a con, okay, for niche and a pro for the broad store. When I say smaller target population, I'm talking about when you run a Facebook ad, you have to choose what target audience you want to target the ad to. So if you had a store about fishing gear and you typed in, I want fishermen as your demographics, that may give you, for example, 3 million fishermen Facebook users that you can target your ad to. But if you had a broad store and maybe you were advertising, I don't know, overall water bottles, because it doesn't matter what sport you do, you may want to buy a water bottle and you want to run an ad on that, you can run that ad to any sport, right? Any sport would be interested in a water bottle, and you can run that to, instead of 3 million like the niche store, for a broad store, you may be able to run up to 10 to 20 million people for that particular water bottle, which you can't do with the niche store or the fisherman store. So that is another good example of what I mean by having a larger target population to run your ads to. And this is also important because if you have a successful ad, you want to be able to scale that Facebook ad to reach more and more people to make more money. But with a smaller target population, you may not be able to scale that ad to really, really high levels to make a lot of money. Niche. The next thing is flexibility. A niche store has obviously less flexibility when it comes to choosing products, where a broad store, there's a lot of flexibility, right? So for example, if you have a niche store that sells fishing gear, you could only sell fishing gear. Maybe they're out there, there's only 100 types of products, 100, let's just say fishing rods. Maybe out there's only, 10 different fishing rod brands, and that's it. That's the only thing you'll ever be able to add to your store if you're selling fishing rods. But for a broad store, you can sell fishing rods, you can sell a baseball bat, you can sell a tent for camping, you can sell, a frisbee for going to the beach. You could sell a lot of different things. So you have a lot of flexibility on what you want to run ads on. And then last but not least, a niche store has a little bit of a higher risk than a broad store. What do I mean by that? If you dedicate a lot of time to setting up a store, like a fishing store, and you find out that, hey, people that are fishers on Facebook don't really care for my fishing Facebook ads, you're going to have to really pivot, and you decide maybe fishing is not for you, then you have to pivot and change your entire store. But when you have a broad store that sells, let's say, sporting goods, and you're not having that much success with your fishing Facebook ads, then you can pivot over to your camping Facebook ads, or you can pivot to any other topic you sell in your sporting goods and run Facebook ads on that particular sport or that particular hobby. So there's a little bit less risk in that sense. You can kind of pivot easier without changing your entire store. So those are kind of the pros and cons that I believe exists for choosing a niche versus broad store. I'm sure there's probably more out there, but these are some of the things that you want to consider immediately when choosing your first thing to source, first product you want to source. You want to answer all of these questions first and then go into the details of actually finding products. And here are my 2 cents if you guys cared. If you are new to drop shipping, I get this question a lot, niche or broad. And I always tell students, if you are new to drop shipping, I recommend you to start with a very, very specific niche, or even a singular product, meaning you only sell one product, one single product on your store, and you sell it really good. Or you sell a very, very specific niche. So instead of fishing gear, you may just sell fishing rods. I mean, that's probably not the greatest example, but that's what I mean by a focused niche. And the reason I always recommend this to new dropshippers is because, first off, new people to dropshipping often fail. That's just the name of the game. When I started, I failed on 3 to 4 stores before I found a successful store. If you know that there's a high chance of failure going into a store, then you don't want to invest too much upfront time building out that store, right? A broad store can take you months to build, whereas a niche store could take you anywhere between days and weeks. So if you fail, you could just, clean out that store and start up a new store. It's easy. But if you have a broad store that you spent months on, then at that point in time you found out it failed, then you just wasted months of your time. So that's the first reason I generally recommend niche store to my new dropshippers. Another reason that niche store is really good for beginning dropshippers and entrepreneurs is because of something I mentioned earlier about retargeting ads. Having a niche store, this will allow your Facebook pixel to mature and adapt to your product or niche's very, very specific target audience faster than a broad store, which increases success and conversions for future Facebook ads. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So if you have a store that only sells fishing gear, and people somehow manage to get to your store somehow, whether it be through one of your ads or they hear about it through branding, through your Facebook group, through Instagram or whatever, chances are they're going to be a fisherman, right? Why would you go to a store that sells fishing gear if you're not a fisherman or you're not at least interested in fishing? If everyone that comes to your store is a fisherman and you sell fishing gear, when you run a Facebook ad, which is really dependent on how smart your Facebook pixel is, then your ad is going to be served to a lot of fishermen. And the chances of conversion, or the chances of one of those people seeing the ad and buying what you're selling, which is fishing gear, is going to be a little bit higher than if you had a broad store. Because if you had a broad store, you sold all sorts of sporting goods, and a quarter of the people there like fishing gear, a quarter of the visitors to your store like fishing gear, a quarter like camping, and another quarter like baseball. When the next time you run a Facebook ad about fishing gear, it's going to also be served to people that like baseball or other sports. It's not going to be as focused, and therefore your conversions are going to be a little bit lower. So, choosing a niche store is a way to overcome that. There are ways to overcome that with broad stores, but I'm not going to get into that right now because that talks a lot about advanced marketing. But if, for simple terms, if you have a niche store, your Facebook pixel is going to grow and become smarter and be more focused on fishing demographics, so that next time you run a Facebook ad to sell one of your fishing gear, it's going to be served to 99% fishermen or fisherwomen. But when you have a broad store and you run that same ad and you do the same things, same steps, that ad where you're selling fishing gear off your broad store is going to be delivered to not only people that like fishing, but also like baseball or camping, and that's not always good for conversion. So that's my 2 cents. So if you're starting your new store, I recommend starting a niche store. If you're very experienced with Facebook ads, then it's up to you if you want to do niche or broad. But these are questions you want to ask yourself before you start sourcing products. All right, guys. See you guys on the next video.